Good evening, everyone. I'm Rabbi Noah Farkas. Welcome to Valley Best Shalom for our weekly evening of study of Pirkei Avot, one of our wonderful ancient texts, which ethics are still very much applicable for these modern times. Joined by a number of my students here online, so hopefully you'll be able to join us. And if you're on Facebook or on YouTube, we'll be very glad to have you with us. Just please Valley Best Shalom. Go ahead and make comments as you type them in, and I'll be able to hopefully respond to them. I'll be sharing my screen in just a moment. Online, I want to welcome Shirley. Lowy is with us, and Cheryl and Vicky are all with us online, as well as some other people. Really nice to see all of you. And here I have lots of my students with me too, so it's really nice to see all of you. Just a couple of brief announcements about what's coming up. Tomorrow night, in the Rabbi study will be with me, and Rabbi Feinstein will be with me. And we're going to have three of our very closest friends, Reverend Najuma Pollard, Pastor Kelvin Sauls, and Pastor Eddie Anderson, who are all spearheading some of the faith response to the Black Lives Matter protests that are happening all over the country. Well, all three of them are African-American pastors here in Los Angeles and are very good friends of mine. So we'll be speaking about what this moment means to them, how they're coping with it as people of faith, how they're shepherding their congregations, and what we can do to be supportive of the positive moves that we hope they'll come out of this. So please join us tomorrow night for that. This Friday night is Kabbalat Shabbat, and it also happens to be June 19th, which is, growing up for me, was always something we observed, because it was the day that Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and so it was the formal end of slavery. This coming weekend also we'll be celebrating Shabbat, obviously, as we do every week. Sunday is Father's Day, and I will be taking the day off of my Sunday schmooze. It's the first time since we started this whole pandemic safer at home, because I always have some time to myself, one day a year, and it's on Father's Day that Sunday. So I'm sorry I won't be with all of you, but I'll be hopefully enjoying a nice hot cup of coffee and maybe sitting in my backyard and relaxing for a little bit. So I won't be doing the Sunday schmooze, but we'll be coming back the following week. And to anyone out there who's a father, or has a father, or knows a father, or is called father, just want to wish you a wonderful, blessed, happy Father's Day this coming week. Okay, let us begin our study. I want to again welcome all of my students here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and as I do that, we'll say the blessing for learning Pirkei Avot together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitzanu mitzotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise to you, God, who gives holiness to our lives by allowing us to busy ourselves, occupy our time with the study of Torah. And together we say, Amen. Okay, so what I'm going to go ahead and do is share my screen. Second here, and I'm going to pull up. Okay, can someone give me a thumbs up just to make sure that I have that you can see it? Because sometimes, and if I scroll a little bit, do you see the scroll? Okay, I just want to make sure, because sometimes we don't. So we are in the first chapter of Pirkei Avot. We've arrived now to the 7th Mishnah. But before we get directly into the Mishnah, I want to just give a general understanding about two ways of approaching life. And this came up in our conversation with Dr. Nick Holton on Sunday, who is an expert in positive psychology. And thinking about the negative aspects of life and the positive aspects of life. I brought this up from Psalm 37, and it just reminds me so much about how we approach life. And in Psalm 37, as it says here, Sor me'ra v'aseh tov v'shochem l'shalom. So it says, turn away or shun evil and make or do good, and you shall dwell or be inhabited forever. So there are really two aspects here that are in that psalm that I think are just really important for us to think about. There are those things which are evil that we have to turn away from, and then there are those things that we have to produce for ourselves that are good. Sor me'ra v'aseh tov. And sor me'ra, many of us get, and that's what we'll be looking at tonight, which is to turn away from things which are evil, although I'm going to complicate that a little bit later tonight. V'aseh tov, do the things which are righteous and good. And if you do both of those things, you can live a full, fulfilled, life, which is really, really wonderful. So many of us think, going back to positive psychology for just a second, sor me ra, turn away from evil. Most of psychological work has been to like remedy something that might feel a little off or wrong. But positive psychology, just going back to that, is about what is the science, empirical study of what makes us feel fulfilled and happy. And so both of those things are important, I think, for establishing a powerful and a beautiful life. There are opportunities that all of us are going to have, which might bring us down a darker or egotistical or self-serving path. And then there are opportunities where we can really do what's right and what's good. And we have to turn away from one and to try to cleave to the other. The last thing I'm going to say about this line, and then transition into our Mishnah, is that both of them take active presence. Nobody naturally just turns away from necessarily from things which are evil. It's very easy to be drawn in, especially in this crazy environment where people literally make millions of dollars off of making us angry and making us turn on each other. So it actually takes a critical will to look at the world and see which things are right and are not right, and turn away, and really turn away from those. And then it takes almost more will or a more sense of presence to create a world of goodness, to actually physically, spiritually, mentally, psychologically create a world of goodness. You have to do both of those actively, which is why those commandments are in active form. Now, when it comes to Pirkei Avot, many of the Mishnayot that we have been studying up until now have actually concentrated on the middle one, Aseh Tov, do what's right, what's good. For example, last week's Mishnah, the sixth Mishnah, it said you should seek out a teacher, you should make yourself a study companion, you should judge everyone with a balanced and open-minded way of looking at them, giving them the benefit of the doubt. Those are all ways of actively doing things which are right. In other Mishnayot, it talks about how do you establish a world of loving kindness, a world of Torah, a world of worship. Those are all positive things. This week's Mishnah, I should say, is that focuses on that very first clause, Sor Meira, turn away from something that is dark or evil or bad. And you'll be able to see actually a mirror from that psalm in this Mishnah. So let's take a look at this Mishnah. It says, Natai ha'araveli, so the Natai who comes from the little town of Aravel in the north of Israel in the 1st century, which is when this was written, Harchek mi shachen ra, ba'al titchaber l'rasha, ba'al tityaes min ha'poraniot. So Natai says, who learned from the person who comes before him, says, Harachek, make a distance from the evil shochen, the evil, and here it's translated as neighbor, but it also means dweller or someone in your neighborhood. It can mean someone in your immediate vicinity, someone that you that is around you. So here it says, Harchek mi shochen ra'a. So turn yourself away, distance yourself from the evil that is kind of in your midst, or even the person who is evil that is in your midst. And then the second clause, ve'al titchaber l'rasha. So even more so, don't become attached. Although the word titchaber there can mean don't befriend or become friends, sort of that reflexive, you're a friend with them, they are a friend with you, with the wicked. And then the third clause, ve'al titayesh min ha'poraniot. Do not, it says here, do not abandon faith in divine retribution. That's not exactly the right translation. The word titeyaesh means from the word yeush, means don't despair. Don't have despair from paraniot, which means retributions. And it could be divine, it could not be divine. Different commentators come in and give us sort of different ways of looking at this, which we're going to get to. So there are three clauses. The first is distance yourself from evil people. And then the other side of this is don't become attached or become friends with evil people. And don't despair. Don't despair from the idea of paraniot, which is it's a complicated idea, but essentially either things that happen in the world that might make you feel good when they happen to evil people. That's the best way I can kind of explain it, is the comeuppance, if you will, a nice Yiddish term for for what kind of the fantasy that you have for how evil people can be done in. So here we have three clauses. Now let's go to our friend Bartanura, who is, for those of you who are just joining us, isn't just a wonderful Italian sparkling bubbly wine in the blue bottle, but if you know this, most kosher wines are named after famous Torah commentators, and Bartanura was an Italian 14th century commentator on Pirkei Avot, so naturally they named the sparkly bubbly wine after him, but his specialty was on Pirkei Avot, so I like to follow some of his comments because it gives us a lot of context. So here he says, on the words where it says, distance yourself from a bad neighbor, he says that you should not learn from his actions, and also that you should not be struck with him in his downfall. For woe is to the evildoer, and woe is to his neighbor. So here is a really interesting comment. It says you shouldn't learn from his actions. I think that's pretty obvious, right? It seems like very obvious advice. You shouldn't learn from the actions of someone who does evil. That's that sor meirah, turn away from someone who does evil. So if you see anyone or see someone in our lives or see an influential person, especially someone who you know who's your neighbor, doing something wrong, you shouldn't repeat what they do, right? And also, it says you should really distance yourself from them so that, like, the assumption is that when someone does something wrong or evil, that you should distance yourself from them because they're gonna get their comeuppance, they're gonna get their downfall at some point, and so you should stay away from them because there's now sort of a quote, although I couldn't find where this comes from: "Woe to the evildoer and woe to his neighbor." That is to say that there's going to be collateral damage. So, I can't help but think about the moments that we're in and thinking about what it means to be anti-racist, for example. Now, that's a weird term because it's pretty new for most people. We're used to either speaking about being racist or being not racist. And I think many of us are, many of us are not racist. We're not something we're trying to do. Being anti-racist means like sort of being proactive in trying to end racism. So one of the ways that I like to think about it in this Mishnah, and why I think it's so applicable for right now, is that if you hear somebody at your dinner table or on a Zoom call or what have you, who makes a racist comment, and they're your friend, what this moment calls for, and I actually think what this Mishnah calls for, is that you have to call them out on it. That you actually have to turn yourself away from them. And you have to say, look, I don't believe that you're totally evil or that you're necessarily a bad person, but those kinds of comments are just not acceptable anymore. And you have to nip it in the bud, because otherwise you've become sort of their neighbor and you're going to be associated with that. That's the idea, is that as history turns and the ideas change in life, if you hear someone make, especially an overtly racist comment, that's the moment that you're called to take action. And you don't have to be angry or mean about it. You just have to make sure that you say, you know what, I don't think I can associate with that comment. I'm going to disassociate myself with that comment. Turn away from the evil, turn away from the person who's doing evil, okay? And then when he says in the second comment, where it says, Al titchaber l'rasha, don't befriend an evildoer, he says, unless stated the sages, anyone who clings to evildoers, even though he does not act like them, gets the same kind of retribution to them. To what does this matter like? To one who enters the house of a tanner, even though he doesn't take anything with him, nonetheless, he absorbs that foul smell and brings it out with him. Of course, I can think of what the rabbis would bring this up as a metaphor because it's something they're familiar with, right? You go to the leather maker who's got essentially these skins of animals hanging outside their house, and they're scraping the skin and dyeing it and cooking it to make it into leather. It's a very foul smelling thing. And you go and you spend time in an environment like that, those odors might cling to you and sort of as you walk away. So here again, it's about don't attach yourself to evil actions. In fact, you have to actively disassociate yourself with evil actions, because complicity in this case will actually lead you to being associated with them. in the Holocaust, just to give you an example, those who didn't actively push back against the Nazis, we mostly think are complicit in the can't even get the word out, in the execution of the Holocaust. That if you didn't actively fight against it, you are associated with it. And I think that the world felt that way in many ways, and certainly we as Jews have felt that way. And I think the same is true again if you experience someone who is saying something that is racist in this moment. If you associate with them and you don't actively turn away, you're complicit. You're implicated in that moment. And I think that's what Bartenura, even though he's not discussing this moment, these ancient ethics are still, I think, very applicable for today. And then the last clause. So the last clause is a little bit more theological, right? It says, don't despair of punishment, paraniot. And here Bartenura is trying to help us understand what that meant for him. He says that you should not say the actions of this evildoer are succeeding. I'll go and cling to him, since fortune is smiling at him. Therefore, it states, do not despair of punishment, meaning to say, know that punishment will come upon him quickly, as his calamity will come suddenly. So one of the ways I try to think about what this means is, so often, those amongst us who are driven by our egos, those amongst us who are driven only by strict self-interest, become successful. And as a culture, we tend to celebrate them. They become wealthy, they become influencers, whatever that means. They feel that in order to be successful, you have to be kind of dodgy and punchy and not actually be good to other people. You have to take advantage of other people. And so when we see that kind of behavior and we see them succeeding, it's very easy for us to try to adopt that behavior, because ultimately it's not that we want to be bad people, but we want to be successful. So it's very easy for us to be seduced by that if I want to be wealthy, I have to act in a certain way, or I have to lie, cheat, or steal to get to the top. If I want to be very influential, I have to either do something that's a little bit morally nefarious, or I have to, unfortunately, we know this from previous years in the film industry, that if you're a woman and you wanted to become successful, you'd have to, sort of give up on some of your own moral scruples, either to do a nude scene or to a sexual scene, or even to do things off camera that really sort of impugn your own sense of moral sensibility. And then because you're either taken advantage of, or because the system has perpetrated this idea that to be successful, you have to lie, cheat, steal, give up on your moral compass, that is that the world then becomes about the people who cheat, lie, steal, etc., to become successful. And here Bartenura is saying, just because it appears that way, don't despair. Don't think that the world has to be that way. And that when people come crashing down, which we know historically that happens, and not maybe with everyone, but historically, eventually, that evil is overcome in many ways. If you participated in it, you are implicated in it. If you participated in lying or cheating or stealing, then you are implicated in a society that is known for lying, cheating, or stealing. And so even though it might appear that that's what it takes to become wealthy or to be happy, what's most important is not, according to Bartenura's version of this Mishnah, is to not despair and to allow yourself to stay the course and turn away from the evil and actively make a good life. Sur me rava aseh tov. And that is what it means to live well and to live fully. Now, the rabbis, as we move to the sort of next idea in this Mishnah, the rabbis took this Mishnah and thought about it in a broader sense. So don't get close to evil people. Do good. Stay away from your evil neighbors, right? So they wanted to think about, like, what is the metaphor for what God looks down at us that combines this idea of putting evil people in one category and good people in another category, And then this third category of each and every one of us who have to make certain decisions kind of in a middle category. And that God somehow is wrapped up in that theology is wrapped up in that. And for that, to understand that metaphor, we have to look at Masechet Rosh Hashanah, which is all about the new year. And here, the Talmud gives us that perfect metaphor that we use on Rosh Hashanah all the time. And here it says for those of you keeping score, this is Rosh Hashanah 16b 12, if you want to know where that is in the Masechet. And I'll just read the English for the sake of brevity. It says, the Gemara goes back to discuss the Day of Judgment. So Rabbi Kruspadai and Rabbi Yochanan said, 3 books are open on Rosh Hashanah before the Holy One, blessed be God. One of holy wicked people, and one of holy righteous people, and one of middling people, people in the middle, Benoni, people who are both good and bad, and their deeds balance out. Holy righteous people are immediately written and sealed for life. Holy wicked people are immediately written and sealed for death. And middling people are left with their judgment suspended from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur, their fate remaining undecided. If they merit through good deeds, mitzvot, etc., they are then written for life. And they do not, well, then they do not merit it, they are written for death. Now, I think many people who are online and people on Zoom with me probably have never actually studied this passage, but know the content of this passage. How many of you, and on Zoom, you can just raise your hands if you want, how many of you have ever heard the phrase, may you be written in the book of life? Right? How many of you ever say that, especially in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it's one of the ways that you say Gemar Tov, for example, right? Well, that's taken directly from this text. This is the text from which all of that comes. And so here, God is sort of opening up 3 books, and he's got the totally evil people in one, and the totally good people in another, and then the book in the middle, right? It's I guess it's better than Santa Claus. Santa Claus only had 2 lists. God actually has 3 lists, right? And that was a joke, and I think only Dennis is laughing at the joke. Okay, so what I find really interesting about this is, have you ever met anyone who's perfectly righteous? Like, have you ever met anyone who's never made a mistake, never lied because they were insecure about something, never, never harmed a fly, so to speak, right? Never drank too much, never ate too much. I think that's really interesting, right? And imagine if your world, I mean, it's like that TV show, The Good Place. Like, if you were just trying to get all these points to get into heaven, like, you would have this book. I wonder how many people are actually written in the book of the righteous. And now, what about the other side? There have been some really evil people in the world. Truly, truly evil people. But of the 7 billion people who are living on this planet today, and if you add to that all the billions of people who have come before, I can't help but thinking, as a percentage-wise, that book can't be that full. Unless, God's bar for righteousness is just so high that all of us are written in that book. It's either all of us or very few of us. So you imagine then that the way I think about it is, the righteous book is either pretty empty or almost empty. The evil book is probably either pretty empty or almost empty. But the book in the middle, it's got a lot of pages. It's got a lot of pages. And that's how we live our lives, as we see ourselves sort of with this open book. So, which to me, begs the question, which begs the deepest question, when it says, don't be with an evil person, or stay away, don't become friends with an evil person. Is it that the person is totally evil? Are we judging them completely in the way that Rosh Hashanah is judging them, as being evil through and through? Or is there a way that people can become good again? Sort of this idea of restorative justice, in a sense, that you're actually not labeled as evil. Your actions might be evil, and you might repent from those things, and that you're not the worst thing you've ever done. So imagine if we went through life understanding that. And if that's the case, how can we understand the Mishnah a little bit differently? You're not really in the evil book, and you're certainly not in the righteous book. At least I'm not in the righteous book. And they're all in the middle. And that each and every one of us, when we've made mistakes, people might judge us as being evil. When we're not evil, we've just done really bad things. And imagine someone who's done a really bad thing 40 years ago and has paid for it every day of their life since. Does that mean that they're evil forever? I'd like to think not. I think that's what restorative justice is about. But the rabbis had mixed feelings about that. There's a tension there about whether when someone does something wrong, especially really wrong, whether or not they are evil forever or evil for a little bit, or maybe they're never evil but only make evil actions. Because the Mishnah, if you look at the Mishnah, it feels like it's given over in these absolutist terms, especially the first two clauses. Turn away, don't attach yourself to evil. But then it also says at the end, don't despair. And so I'm trying to figure out, is there a way to read this Mishnah that it isn't so absolutist? I want to complicate our ideas about what it means to be good and what it means to be evil, knowing that there are always going to be cases of people who are very, very good, and certainly cases of people who are very, very evil. And I'm talking about this middle group. And for that, I want to look at this text from Ruth Rabbah. So Ruth is a book about a woman who travels across the world, even though she doesn't have to, and meets a man named Boaz. And through mutual acts of loving kindness, they establish a relationship. And out of that relationship eventually finds redemption. And at the very end of the book, you find out that King David is actually born out of that relationship. So while they're studying that book, they want to ask these questions. What does it mean to maybe do something in your past and then to maybe come back from it? And in this midrash, it's the best encapsulation I found of the story of a man named Rabbi Meir, who was considered one of the preeminent rabbis of the Mishnaic period, the Amoraic period, not Mishnaic period, and Rabbi Meir's teacher, the person who taught Rabbi Meir everything he knows. Rabbi Meir was a student. Rabbi Meir became one of the most powerful rabbis of his generation. So many things that we know are attributed to him. Rabbi Meir's teacher, he had two teachers. The first was Rabbi Akiva, who I think many of us know and have heard of Rabbi Akiva. And the second was a man named Elisha ben Abuya, who was never, ever considered in rabbinic literature to be given the title rabbi, which is a really interesting comment because he was a scholar. And here the story begins. So Rabbi Meir, who was coming up in the world and was establishing himself as a major player, Rabbi Meir, in the rabbinic world, he was sitting and expounding, and he was teaching at this point already, expounding the law in Tiberias, right on the banks of the Kinneret, the Galilee. And Elisha, who, and this is the only time in all of rabbinic literature, he's referred to as a rabbi, Rabbi Meir's rabbi, his rabbi, passed by on the street riding a horse on Shabbat. And they said to Rabbi Meir, look, Elisha is passing by in the street. So what's the first clue that something is really off is that it's Shabbat and Elisha is riding a horse on Shabbat. And if you know anything about the laws of Shabbat, you know that you're not supposed to ride a horse on Shabbat for all sorts of reasons. And here, this famed rabbi, this powerful rabbi who's Rabbi Meir's teacher, is riding a horse on Shabbat. That's considered a very, very big no-no. And so Rabbi Meir's students all look to Rabbi Meir and say, look, Elisha is passing by in the street. And so what Rabbi Meir does is he runs out of the study house and he greets him. And Elisha said, well, what are you expounding on? What are you teaching on today, Rabbi Meir? And Rabbi Meir said, and this is a line from Job, and God blessed the end of Job's life more than the beginning, which we know is from the last chapter of Job. If you remember the book of Job, Job is tested by God. He had a number of blessings, all sorts of calamities fall upon Job. And after the end, God gives him twice as much back as what he was taken away from him. That's the basic understanding of Job. And so Rabbi Meir was teaching this line. God blessed the end of Job's life more than the beginning. And Elisha responded, well, Nu, what are you saying about it? Like, what's your drash? What's your Devar Torah about this line? How are you trying to get people to understand it? And Rabbi Meir said the word blessed, meaning that he doubled his wealth for him. The word blessed means to Rabbi Meir, he blessed him, that he was blessed with double wealth. So God gave Job twice as much back at the end of his life than at the beginning of his life. And Elisha said to him, well, Akiva, your other teacher, his friend, his colleague, Elisha's colleague, did not used to say that. But rather he said, and Hashem blessed the end of Job's life more than the beginning. And then he said, because of his mindful repentance and good deeds, which were in his hand at the beginning. And so what Elisha is saying, using the words of Rabbi Akiva, is that Job was blessed at the end of his life only because he was good at the beginning of his life. That's Elisha's understanding. Now, let's do one more, and then I'll sort of give you a little bit of the backstory, okay? Because what appears to be a simple conversation has so much in the background that I have to explain it. So then Elisha says, okay, well, what else? Remember, Elisha's on the horse. He's riding on the horse. He's looking down at Rabbi Meir, and he's like, okay, Nu, what else? And Rabbi Meir responded, and here again, Ecclesiastes. He says, I was also teaching this line, the end of a matter is better than its beginning. And Elisha said, well, what did you say about that? And Rabbi Meir replied, you have the example of a man who buys merchandise in his youth, and he has a loss, but then he profits in his old age, right? So if somebody, let's just say in our modern context, buys a stock in his youth and it goes down in value, but by the time he's ready to retire, it goes up. That is to say, he invests in something and it goes up. And here's another interpretation I came up with. He says, to the end of the matter then is better than the beginning. You have the example of a man who does evil deeds in his youth, but good deeds in his old age. And another interpretation, the end of the matter is better than the beginning. A man can learn Torah in his youth and forget it, but in his old age, he can renew it. And so the end of the matter is better than its beginning. Here, Rabbi Meir gives three explanations of this line from Ecclesiastes, that the end of the matter is better than its beginning. One is about investing in money. The second is about doing good deeds. And the third is about learning and remembering Torah. Okay. Now you remember that these lines are all similar to the lines from Job, that Job was blessed more at the end of his life than the beginning. Now, what you should know is that in the Midrash and in the Talmud, the conversation being presented is never the entire conversation. The question here is what is not being said, but is being alluded to in this conversation. And you'll find this out in just a minute. And think about the student now speaking to a teacher, his rabbi, who's overtly transgressing Shabbat. And what is the student asking of his teacher? Both very learned men. Okay. And then Elisha said to him, Akiva, your teacher, didn't say this, but rather he says, the end of a matter is good. That is when the good from its beginning. And for me, there is an example. So here, he says, the way that you taught this, Rabbi Meir, is interesting, but my colleague, Akiva, your other teacher, didn't say this. Again, you have it wrong. He said, the end of the matter is good. That is, it is only good if it was good from its beginning. So what does that mean? Here he gives an example. He says, Abuya, who is Elisha's father, my father was a great man of his generation. And when the time came for my circumcision, my bris, he invited all the great men of Jerusalem, and he invited Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua among them, two of the greatest scholars of his parents' generation. And then they ate and drank and sang songs and composed alphabetical acrostics. Actually has the word in the Midrash, alphabetin, which means alphabetic poem. So you would, make a Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, and then every line you would write a poetry beginning with it. It was a way of passing time and creating art. Rabbi Eliezer said to Rabbi Yeshua, these men are busying themselves with pointless things, singing songs and drinking, and we're neglecting to pursue our affairs. So They began with Torah, and from Torah to prophets, and from prophets to writings, and they rejoiced in these words as when they were given from Sinai, surrounded by flaming fire. And where they were if they were not given from Sinai in fire, as it says, and the mountain burned with fire, reaching up to the heart of the sky. And Abuya said, so great is the power of Torah. This son of mine, talking now about Elisha, if he survives, I'll offer to give him Torah. So Abuya was there drinking with all of his buddies, writing poetry, singing bard songs, and the two great scholars didn't want to do that. They wanted to teach Torah. So they began learning and teaching Torah. Abuya was moved by this and said, this power of Torah is so wonderful, I'll give my son over to Torah. Except that in Elisha's opinion, he says, and so because the intention of my thought was not for the sake of heaven, that is to say, not for its own sake, my personal Torah, the Torah I learned that Elisha is talking about, did not continue in me. And here you come to the psychological opening into the mind of Elisha ben Abuya. What is he saying? He's saying, there's something about me that's broken. There's something about me that from the moment I was born and started studying, I didn't do it for the right purpose because my father gave me over, not for the sake of learning Torah itself, but because he was attracted to the power that Torah brought with it, the power of these two men, vanity, essentially. And so if you go back to what they were talking about, what Rabbi Meir and Elisha were talking about, when Rabbi Meir says that Job was blessed twice at the end than he was in the beginning, Rabbi Meir is not referring to Job. He's referring to Elisha. That you might have fallen so far away from Torah. You might have become an apostate. You might have given up. You might have walked away. But you can be blessed at the end of your life. And what did Elisha say? That's only the case if you were good from the very beginning, and I'm not a good person. I'm an evil person, which means my Torah doesn't stick. And then Rabbi Meir says, well, what about Ecclesiastes? Remember what he said? He said about Ecclesiastes, the end of the matter is better than its beginning. And he gave 3 examples. The person who invests when he's young, and even if he takes a loss in the short term, can make a gain in the long term. The person who does evil deeds in his youth, maybe can do good deeds in his old age. And then the third is someone who learns Torah but then forgets it, that is to say doesn't do it, and then renews it in his old age. What is the student saying to the teacher? You taught me Torah, you've walked away, you've done all sorts of terrible things, but I believe you can be good again. Again, he's not talking about Ecclesiastes. What looks like a basic conversation about Torah is a psychological conversation between a student and a teacher about the nature of good and evil and about how one sees themselves. And here Elisha, who feels that he is so evil in his own right, says, I never did it for the right reasons in the first place. And therefore, it's not worth for me to return. I can't return. And Rabbi, you can hear the pain now as you read it again. You hear the pain in Rabbi Meir's voice trying to convince his teacher to come back home. And Elisha is saying, I don't think I can. And this goes on. It takes another turn. Because now when you listen to it, you listen to the sort of tenseness in Elisha's jaw as he looks down at Rabbi Meir. He says, what further did you discuss, Meir? Not calling him Rabbi Meir, right? Trying to twisting the barb now. This evil inclination is beginning to take over now. And Rabbi Meir responded to him, gold or glass, this is again from Job, gold or glass cannot match its value, nor vessels of fine gold be exchanged for it. The idea there is that there's something wonderful about faith, that it is essentially priceless. You can't change your faith for gold or glass, right? And your vessels of fine gold can't be changed out. You can't. So here, Elisha says to Meir, well, what did you say about that? And Rabbi Meir said, these are the words of Torah, which are difficult to buy as vessels of gold and easy to destroy like glass. That is Torah, which is living a good life, making a good life, making a life that's blessed, making a life that is ethical, making a life that is precious, is very difficult to achieve and is easily broken. Here you begin to see almost Rabbi Meir giving up. He's like, so hard it is to learn Torah, to learn to do what's right, to follow the rules, to be ethical when you don't have to be, when no one else is looking. So easy is it to give in to your evil inclination and let things break down. And Elisha again responded, Akiva, your teacher, didn't speak this way, but rather, as vessels of gold and glass, if they are broken, it is possible to repair them. So a wise disciple that has lost his Mishnah is able to renew it. And here Elisha sounds like maybe he's saying, oh, maybe I can come back. This is at the very edge of the turning now, right? And as they're walking away from town. Here it says, right, Akiva, your teacher, did not speak this way, but rather, as vessels of gold and glass are easily broken, it's possible to repair them. So a wise disciple that has lost his Mishnah is able to renew it. And as the sun, I just like have this image of like the sun is going down. It's on Shabbat. They're walking farther and farther and farther away from the study hall, which means they're walking farther and farther away from the center of the community, from Judaism, from Torah, from tradition. Elisha, who's on a horse, who's breaking Shabbat, right? And he's looking down at Rabbi Meir and he's having this discussion. And then Elisha turns and in a very sad moment, he says to Rabbi Meir, he says, return, meaning go back. And Rabbi Meir says, why? And he responded, because this is the edge of the Shabbat boundary. And he spread it, how do you know? And Elisha said, well, from the footsteps of my horse, which has gone about 2,000 amot. And Rabbi Meir said, and with all this wisdom of yours, you will not return. And Elisha responded, it's not in my power. And he asked, why? And Elisha explained to him, I was riding on a horse while passing by a synagogue on Yom Kippur that also happened to be on Shabbat. And I heard a voice from heaven break forth saying, turn back, O you rebellious children. That's a line we say in the liturgy. It's from Jeremiah, but we say that on Yom Kippur all the time. And he says, turn back to me and I will turn back to you. Except for Elisha, the son of Abuya, because he knows my strength and has rebelled against me. So Elisha fills that in, right in his head. So literally we're standing at the edge, at the border of the community. And Elisha, who knows so much Torah, tells his student, you have to go back because you're about to break Shabbat yourself. And Rabbi Meir is basically saying, with all of this wisdom, with all of this knowledge, you won't come back. And Elisha responded, it's just not in my power. And when he asked why, it's clear that as Elisha was riding on this horse on Yom Kippur, he heard the congregation singing this song of return, tshuva, except that in his head, he heard a voice tell him, everyone can come back except for me, because as powerful as I am, I've rebelled. Here is a psychological drama written 1,000 years ago, more than 1,000 years ago, between a student and his teacher, a teacher and his student, using the theme and the metaphor of Shabbat to think about, can someone who has done something wrong ever be good again? Can someone who is evil, evil through and through? And here, literally, Rabbi Meir is trying to pull him back into the community. And Elisha is at the very edge and says, I can't go back. And he believes that for all the reasons that people internalize the hatred and the darkness in themselves. And he says, I was never good in the beginning and I can't be good at the end. And that I never did this for the right reasons in the first place. And so I'll never learn it again. I'll never be able to do it again. So right when you think Elisha's going to turn around, he doesn't. And he sends his student back to the study hall. And that's kind of where that part of the story ends, and it just feels very tragic, right? The very end of the story, Elisha dies. and they think maybe he repented on his deathbed. And Rabbi Meir was rejoicing because it seemed like Elisha wanted a Jewish funeral. And so he said, my teacher was taken and he repented. And when they buried Elisha, a light descended to burn his grave. And they said to Rabbi Meir, the grave of your teacher is burning. And he went and spread his talit over it. And he said to Elisha, stay this night, and it shall be in the morning, that if we will perform unto thee the part of the kinsman, and it will be well or tov, let him do the kinsman's part. But if he be not willing to do his kinsman's to thee, then I will do the part of the kinsman to you. As God lives, lie down until the morning, which is what Boaz says to Ruth, which is why it's tied to this. He spreads his talit over his teacher's grave and says, I'll basically retranslate it in much more idiomatic. He says, I'll be here all night. I'm going to cover you from this divine fire that you feel is evil, and it will be well with you, because I can make you good again, even if it's not in your lifetime. And here the rabbis explain, stay this night, which means in this world, which is all night, which, by the way, this is the midrash that Eli Wiesel was thinking of when he wrote the book, because it says, Ha'olam hazeh kulo laila, is the world of night. And if you've read the book Night, you know that he uses midrash often, and this is the midrash he pulls on. He says, it shall be in the morning that if he will perform unto thee to be part of a kinsman and be well, meaning if God performs part of being a friend to you, it can be well. It shall be in the morning, that is, in a world that is all good. For, as it says in the Ashrei, that if he will perform unto thee part of the kinsman, that is God, blessed be he, says, Tov Adonai lakol v'rachamav v'kol ma'asav, that God is good to every single person. He has compassion on every single one. And it says, if he be not willing to do the part of the kinsman to me, I'll be a kinsman to you. As God lives, lie down until morning, and the fire stopped. And they said to him, our teacher in the world to come, if they say you, would you rather see your father or your teacher? What would you say? And Rabbi Meir said, I'd see my father first and only then my teacher. And they said to him, did they hear you or not? And he replied, it is not the tradition in the case of the Torah. With the Torah and in the case of tefillin, with tefillin, maybe they say that Elisha because of the merits of the Torah. After many days, his daughters came seeking charity. The daughters of Elisha sought charity from the rabbi. And he said, may no one show him mercy, may no one pity his orphans. And they said to him, do not consider his actions, but his Torah. And as soon as he heard that, Rabbi began weeping and decreed that they should be given help, saying, if he whose Torah was not for the name of heaven stands thus, how much more so for those who could? The clinch line in all of this, without getting into the complications of the midrash, is that, is it the actions in someone's life or what they stood for that matters? Can you separate the deeds that they've done for the character of who they are? Can Rabbi Meir believe the answer was yes? And Elisha believed the answer was no. And he believed that especially about himself, which is why it's a tragic story. And so when the Mishnah, going back to our Mishnah now, which seems very absolutist terms, right? Nitanai Harbi says, distance yourself from those who dwell as evil people and do not attach yourself to the evil one, but do not despair from God's retribution. So it's what seems very absolutist can be reworked in the light of that midrash. And it says, you should distance yourself from people who do evil. And you shouldn't become friends with them because you're worried about maybe the collateral damage that goes down if they are brought down. But in the end, don't despair, I think, because God's retribution here could be seen as a fantastical or evil sort of fantasy of what good people want to happen to bad people. But I actually think if you think about it, kind of flip the notion on its head, is that don't despair because maybe someone who's not good today can be good tomorrow. And someone who appeared to be wicked in the past might actually be a good person who just made mistakes. and that you shouldn't associate yourself with them when they do evil. But maybe if they have the opportunity of doing tshuva, you should be like Meir, Rabbi Meir, and try to ask people to come back into the community. Come back. And of course, the saddest part about Elisha ben Abuya is that he hated himself more than he hated other people. And that self-hatred is what drove him to sin and eventually allow himself to die and be separated from the community. And so as we end tonight's class, I thought maybe just open it up for a very brief discussion about what it means to turn away from evil actively and to make good and do good actively, sur me rav aset tov. But complicating that idea with this idea that maybe it's not people, generally speaking, who are evil. Maybe it is actions that are evil, which gives us the opportunity to find goodness. So I want to we have about 5 or 6 minutes. I thought for those of you who are joining me on Zoom or anyone on Facebook who wants to make a comment or a question, I'll entertain comments or questions. Arnie, you have a question? Yeah. I will unmute you. 1 second.
Okay. So there's a certain part of this that we're reflecting on ourselves, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's both your neighbor and yourself. Not at the same time, but one might argue it's the cleansing that you go through for yourself as well.
Yes, I think that's true. And I think that anytime the Mishnah or the Midrash tells you to do something referring to someone else, you have to also internalize that and think about what it is to saying for ourselves.
Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Mark, I love the beard, my friend. I don't think I've seen you with the beard.
Yeah. Thank you. It's taken a few months to get here.
I can see
so the question would be, say if evil is lying and a person lies and then they change their life and they stop lying, but does that mean that those impulses, the self-destructive impulses of lying, are going to also change if they change? In other words, there's a kind of a self-destructiveness to an evil person. And if they stop one aspect of their evilness, do you think it means also that the other is changed too with it? Am I clear?
Great question. I don't have the direct answer to that because I think everyone's unique. But I'll say it this way. Somebody who is actively working to better their lives, even if they've done some dark stuff in the past or have lied or cheated, if enough time has gone by and they've asked for forgiveness, if they've made, let's be clear, separate from all of this psychological, spiritual work is the work of the justice system. So if you broke something or stole something or you harmed someone, you do have to sort of pay for that, right? That's separate from restitution and all of that. Let's say that system is working and folks who are kind of not doing great things, or maybe people who've done some pretty bad things, are paying the price. They're being incarcerated, they're paying fines, they're registering, they're doing whatever it is, right? And the question then is, let's say they go through that and they do feel that they are correcting their life. They're dealing with their addiction, they're dealing with their sort of evil inclinations, they're learning how to respect other people's space, bodies, all of those, all of property, whatever. And then they come to you and they say, I'm trying to get better. It seems from an absolutist perspective, you just stay away from them and they're done, they're toast. But from another perspective, if you take Rabbi Meir's perspective, it seems like you try to reach out to them. You say, maybe the core learning of this isn't Elisha, right? It's Rabbi Meir's teaching, which is things which went wrong earlier can be fixed at the end. But the matter at the end is better than it was at the beginning. That Job was blessed at the end of his life more than at the beginning of his life. That a man who forgets Torah can learn it at the end of his life, even if he learned it and forgot it. Or to use the last one, right, which is a good life is hard to acquire and easily broken, like glass, right? But it can be repaired. It can be repaired.
Okay.
And so as I look through, as we get through almost to the end of chapter 1, we have a couple more to go, but get to the end of chapter 1, we begin to establish what might feel like absolutist terms all the way through, begins to blend together a bit and talk about what it means to build a healthy, a safe, a just, and a compassionate life. And again, I think I'll just end on this. And if I'm too political, please, write me a note. It's fine. I'll take it. But the mass incarceration system in this country, the 3 strikes rules, all of that, understood that if you did something wrong repeatedly, your life is forfeit. Your life is over. That you're an evil person. And the process that our country is finally beginning to reconcile with is the racialized outcomes of that, or something that I think has been an embarrassment to us, and that people who might have made some really bad choices aren't necessarily bad people. And while they have to pay for crimes, they also should be welcomed back into society. And we should understand what that means. That justice has to be restorative and not just punitive. And I think that is a moment that our country is beginning to finally reckon with. Lots of questions about the uncertainty of the future, about what that means, but I think at the moment we're finally beginning to reckon with it. We've now entered a 3.5 week of protest, and that is now the longest sustained protest movement in the history of this country. The civil rights protests were ongoing, but they weren't every day. This has now been every single day around the world. So it's something to think about. All right, friends, stay healthy and stay loving with each other. I'll see you next week, and then I'm going to be taking a couple weeks off because I'm going to go on vacation. And by going on vacation, meaning just not answering my phone for a couple of weeks. So, because as soon as I come back, it's right on to high holiday. So I'm going to take a couple weeks to rest. So really good to see all of you here. Really good to see those who are online with us, and just have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.